The origins of the Grim Reaper. I use a scythe as my main tool to manage the land. Due to this, people often joke that I'm friends with the Grim Reaper, or I am the Grim Reaper myself. But who is the Grim Reaper, and where do they come from? In today's video, we'll find out. Throughout history, peoples from across the globe have formed their own representations and personifications of conceptual death, and are leaving behind the realm of the living. In the contemporary Western world, our most prevalent pop culture image of death is that of the Grim Reaper, a male skeletal figure with a long black cloak, often holding an hourglass, but always wielding a scythe to slay the living and lead them to the afterlife. Though this is a modern portrayal of death, the imagery is old. Clothing we no longer wear, tools we no longer use, a purpose displaced. Where did this imagery come from? How old is it, and what does it all mean? Before we start, I'd like to apologise that this video has taken so long to make. My research into death has been far more comprehensive than I had anticipated. When speeding down a hill on my bicycle, I decided to gently dismount head first when my mudguard broke and wedged into my front wheel. I no longer remember this flying lesson, as I was admitted to hospital with a fractured skull and concussion. However, it was a good lesson on why I should have been wearing a cycle helmet. I'm all better now, and so as promised, here is my video on the origins of the Grim Reaper. The imagery of the Grim Reaper is far more complex than a single origin story. Many cultures have come up with similar concepts. As people have moved and intermingled, these ideas have become mixed, and over time combined. I'll be looking at different places where the imagery has been used, which will help form our current depictions of the Grim Reaper. Let's start with the name. The title Grim Reaper is fairly new. It's first written in a publication of 1847 by the Scottish Reverend Robert Mingus, called The Circle of Human Life. It's a self-described loose translation from the Protestant theologian and professor at Halle, Dr. August Tulloch. In discussion of Psalm 90, verses 10 to 12, Mingus writes, "All know full well that life cannot last above 70, or for most 80 years. If we reach this term without meeting the Grim Reaper with his scythe, there or thereabouts, meet him we surely shall." Here, a Grim Reaper is in lowercase, so it's not a title at this point. It's a description. Reaper describing the imagery of reaping souls, and Grim an adjective to describe the Reaper. So at this point, it's not a name, but we can see how those words jump off the page to form our contemporary Reaper with title. Death's attire. It's commonly believed that the black robe originated in the 14th century during a time of plague, when life and death were held in a delicate balance. This is due to the similarity between the Grim Reaper's long black hooded cloak and the funeral attire worn by the police during the 14th century plague known as the Black Death. The plague swept through Europe and North Africa between 1346 and 1353, with outbreaks in Asia and other parts during this period. In total, it killed between 1/4 and 3/4 of the world population. Now this is quite a range, but record keeping wasn't great at that time, and who can blame them? They had greater priorities on their mind. The people who treated the dying, such as the Benedictines, the Black Monks, and those who provided support in ceremony, the priests, were intrinsically linked to depictions of the personification of death. The colour black's association with death is believed to have started in Roman times. However, it became popular as funeral attire after Prince Albert's death in 1861, when Queen Victoria took to wearing black in mourning for the next 40 years until her death. In Europe, black is not the only colour associated with death. As in Asia, white has deathly associations, symbolising purity and rebirth. A white funeral cloth was often used to wrap the body before burial. Starting in France in the 16th century, children and unmarried women wore white to symbolise they had been bereaved or orphaned. Famously, Mary Queen of Scots took to wearing white after she lost several family members in a short period of time. This association continued to the start of the 20th century, when Queen Victoria requested a white veil to be placed over her face at her funeral. Images of death wearing white or draped in a white funeral cloth can be seen in pictures of the 15th and early 16th century, including artwork by Hieronymus Bosch and Bernd Notke's Danse Macabre paintings for St Nicholas's Church in Tallinn, Estonia. The Scythe. The Grim Reaper's most iconic feature is his scythe, the sinister weapon that he uses to slay the living and drag them to the afterlife. Or is it? Well, on the whole, maybe not until recently. For example, in Wilfred Owen's 1917 poem, The Next War, death stands with the soldiers, not as a violent figure, but an ever-present companion, a brother to the men, who whistled with them and shaved them with his scythe. Here the scythe is not an instrument of war, but a symbol of the inevitable, their upcoming death. So the Grim Reaper wields a scythe, but he may not use it to kill people. Let's go in a small segue to see whether our Reaper is a figure of fear or a friend, a psychopath or a psychopomp. A psychopomp literally means soul guide. It is a spiritual being who will help the dead by leading them to the afterlife. A psychopomp does not judge the person. They're often portrayed as peaceful characters who will wait for someone to die. They're not the killer themselves. Examples of psychopomps include the Islamic and Judaic archangel Azrael, who splits the soul from the body and leads them to the afterlife. The Norse shield maiden Valkyries, who collects the fallen from the battlefields. The Greek ferryman Charon, who for a price will ferry people over the silent river Styx. The Egyptian jackal-headed Anubis. Or, coming back to Britain, we have the Welsh Gwyn ap Nudd with his Cwn Annwn, the hunting dogs of Annwfyn. One of the earliest personifications of death is in Greek mythology, with the psychopomp Thanatos. He's often depicted as a winged boy or man carrying a sword. Thanatos is interesting as he is tricked by Sisyphus, who tricked death by asking Thanatos how his manacles work. Thanatos the idiot demonstrated himself, and of course Sisyphus refused to release them. This led to a period where death did not come to people, with battles fought but no one dying, with gruesomely wounded men roaming the battlefields unable to find peace. Sounds like a zombie apocalypse. This has probably led to some of our modern depictions of tricking death, such as the tales of Beedle the Bard from the Harry Potter book series. So, death is pretty much a mixed character. If I was going to rate him with Dungeons & Dragons, I would say he's on the whole lawful good, waiting for those who have died and leading them to the afterlife. Or lawful neutral, keeping the world in a state of balance. It's only recently that death has strayed into those more evil alignments and started to be the killer. The psychopomp Thanatos carried a sword, a weapon to kill people. However, our Grim Reaper carries a scythe, a farming tool, which would not be seen as a weapon. As a cheeky plug, if you're interested in the potentials of the scythe in combat, then see my video of the scythe as a weapon after you watch this one. Excellent, we're off the psychopomp segue and back onto the scythe. The scythe is an ancient tool. Versions of a scythe with a flint blade have been used since around 5000 BC. This is a long time before the pyramids or Stonehenge had even started being built. The scythe would have originally been used for cutting grass as food for livestock. It's not until the 16th century that it became popular for reaping crops, after invention of the bow cradle, a curved piece of wood which can be attached to the scythe to help collect the stalks into neat piles. Before this, a sickle would have been used, a hand scythe with a crescent-shaped blade. So a reaper wouldn't have got his scythe until sometime after the start of the 16th century. However, the concept of reaping souls is much older. In the Bible, Jesus tells the parable of the weeds, in which he describes the good people as wheat being collected into the barn at harvest. In his parables, Jesus used imagery which was common at the time. It's therefore likely that people were well aware of the idea of reaping souls in the Middle East 2,000 years ago. Images of spiritual beings holding sickles can be seen in depictions of Bronze Age Greek and Egyptian deities. The pre-Olympian ancient Greek titan Cronus, the god of the harvest, is often depicted holding a sickle or harper, a sword with a sickle-like protrusion along its edge. The story goes that Cronus defeated his draconian father by using this tool to castrate him and making himself leader of the Titans. In later Greek mythologies, Cronus is depicted as the supreme, ancient god who lived in the peaceful lands of Elysium, the equivalent to the British Avalon, a utopia or heavenly-like place where people could go if they've lived a righteous life. This links Cronus to the afterlife, not the terrifying fear of the underworld, but the sleeping figure of peace and restfulness in death. The hourglass. Greek mythology has a similar named figure, Kronos, the god of time, later referred to as Father Time. Time is measured by the passing of seasons, and with the seasons the harvest. It therefore seems likely that these two similarly named gods, Kronos, the god of time, and Kronos, the god of the harvest, were always meant to be one. And over time, their imagery has been combined. Father Time is often depicted as an old, bold man with a nice jolly beard, large wings, a black cape, an hourglass, and a scythe. Does this remind anyone else of our contemporary Reaper? Thousands of years later, Shakespeare used this as representation of death in A Winter's Tale, representing the passing of 16 years. For the modern day image of a Grim Reaper, the hourglass serves the same purpose, showing the inevitability of people's time running out, grains of sand slipping away. The modern day equivalent of this is the doomsday clock, showing to the time until midnight, when the extinction of the human race is reached. How cheerful! The Grim Reaper's hourglass is specific to an individual's life. It can be seen in a fatalistic view. There's nothing that can be done to stop the inevitable. Or it can be seen as a jump to action, a time frame to complete what you need to do while there's time left on Earth. The hourglass has two containers which can represent the circle of life, with a glass being turned over as one person dies and another is born. This is consistent with the classical Roman mosaics of Father Time's Fortune's Wheel, and from the stories of the Britons, the Ariamrod's Wheel. The skeletal figure. The portrayal of death as an animated skeleton or corpse was common in many cultures, showing the resultant end of human life, the body after death. In medieval Europe, this image of the body was never far away from the public consciousness. From manuscript illuminations, to murals on church walls, to funeral effigies, to oral tales such as the mirror souls of the 3 dead kings, which are told in a previous video. This skeletal or corpse-like imagery became popular around the time of the Black Death, taking over from previous winged angelic figures. This is a time when the proximity of death was drawing closer to people of all ages, genders and occupations. Although in Britain and America, death often takes a male form, in some cultures, France, Spain and Poland for example, death is more likely to be portrayed as a female figure. Another popular image is of the crepuscular death, riding in the half-light on a drawn and pale horse. This particular depiction is from the biblical book of Revelations, describing the last of the 4 horses of the apocalypse. And I looked and beheld a pale horse, and his name that sat on him was Death, and hell followed him. We looked at different aspects of the Grim Reaper, the name, cape, scythe, hourglass, appearance, as well as looking at their role. Let me know if there are other references you think I should have included. See my similar videos on the scythe as a weapon, or a creepy story of death from the 1300s, or look at my eco projects on my channel. Thank you and see you next time.